Today, I have the great pleasure of interviewing someone who I've followed from afar, Patrick Hoverstadt. And just to show you how much of a fanboy I am, this is his first book of his I read, The Fractal Organisation, followed by Patterns of Strategy, followed by, and recently, The Grammar of Systems, right? And I'm still making my way through that one.
Well, that's only a thin one, Rob. You should read that as sitting, mate.
Have you seen the size of the writing? I'm thinking of getting stronger glasses from that book, so we'll see how we go. But of
Sorry
course,
about that.
I got introduced to your work after doing my master's. They actually showed us Stafford Beer's The Heart of the Enterprise and the Brain of the Firm. And that led me searching around, and somehow I got introduced to you, and you just released your first book, and here we are now. So let's start by talking about what's the Patrick Hoverstadt story. How did you get to here? Where were you born? No, not quite that far back.
Okay. It's a long, convoluted story, Rob. So born not far from where I live now. So up in the northwest of England. Dropped out of school because I couldn't see any. To be honest, I couldn't see any point in it. The way we were being taught didn't really make a hell of a lot of sense to me. Went and did a craft apprenticeship and followed that, or then set up my own business and ran that for 13 years. So that was sort of 17 years. Then came out of that for various reasons. I mean, a whole load of stuff happened at about the same time, and went and did an MBA. Came across the system stuff on the MBA, but I'm sort of looping back a bit. I'd first come across system stuff when I was at school. So I borrowed a book that my brother had on system dynamics. So he was 8 years older than me, and so sort of got into it then, but put it down.
Which book was that one? Do you remember?
Oh, it's Limits to Growth.
Okay. So Danielle Meadows and the Club of Rome people.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And that made a lot of sense to me, but put it down, went and did the sort of making stuff thing. And so I'd done that for 17 years, then came out, did an MBA, came across the system stuff on the MBA. And that made kind of a lot more sense to me than anything else we learned on the MBA. Most, quite a lot of which was, and really, and I went along to the prof who was teaching it and said, well, where'd you get jobs in this? He said, well, there aren't any. So he said, the only jobs really are in consulting. So, why don't you start a consultancy? So I thought, well, that's not going to work, is it? Because the thing I had realized about it at that stage was nobody was succeeding in selling it. So at that stage, I think there were probably, I could count on the fingers of one hand the number of people in the UK who were doing Bible systems modeling stuff, And by pure chance, the last night of the MBA, I stood at the bar next to a guy who I hadn't spoken to the whole course. And I just said to him, what did you make of it? He said, well, he'd come out of corporate like most of the guys on the MBA. And he said, pretty much everything we were taught, it's just standard stuff. We've been doing it for years. Nothing new there. He said, except the system stuff. That was good. I said, yeah, well, the trouble is that nobody can sell it. He said, well, no, the trouble is that nobody on the course got it except you. How he knew I'd got it, I don't know. But he said, but I could sell it. And in that meeting, we started the company. We started Fractal. And it took me about a year to work out that he couldn't sell it. But by then I was sort of, I was in, and I there was no way back from there. So, and that was quarter of a century more ago, and I've been doing it ever since. So that's the worky side of the Patrick Hoverstadt story, if that makes sense.
All right. So I started off life as a fitter and turner, fitter and machinist, did an apprenticeship. But I did that as part of a cadetship with Vickers, the English company. So,
all right, okay.
So they had a company out here in Australia, Vickers Ruwalt. So that's where I started. But then ended up doing this thing with a little company called IBM. So got into computers and away we went.
Can I just hold you on that, Rob? Because I think one of the things that sort of that's distinctive is that if you've done a real job, if you've done stuff that actually involves real physical stuff, it gives you a respect for reality that I find a lot of people in consulting and actually in the systems world simply don't have. I've come across a lot of people who can't tell the difference between thinking about stuff and doing stuff in the real world. It's like it's all just going on in their heads, and everything's easy in your head, isn't it? That's why we have science fiction and fantasy and stuff. It's
When I watch CNBC and there's these Wall Street types on there, and I just think to myself, but you don't do anything. You just shuffle stuff around and out pops money and away you go. But years ago, I was having a meeting with the chairman and CEO of United Technology, right? So Dow Jones Index Company and all that sort of stuff. And they gave me a book to read before I met with him, and they said, we're chapter 9, so read this book. This book happened to be Lean Thinking by Womack and Jones, right?
Oh yeah.
And I got on a flight. I was living outside of New York, and I got on a plane to fly to actually San Jose for meetings, and I started reading this book, and I finished it by the time I got to the end, and it blew me away. And there was a sign where a chapter where this manufacturing company got the Japanese lean thinking guys in, and they said, we can come at 10 o'clock at night. And they came in and they wanted to show them slides in the boardroom, and they said, no, Gemba, got to go to Gemba, right? And they're going waste. So they started moving machines around, and I just couldn't imagine. So I'm working for Vickers Ruwald on the shop floor. There was one guy there that he operated the one lathe for 30 years.
Yeah.
And he hated going on holidays because someone would, when he came back, his tools weren't in the right place, right? So
and all the settings would be wrong,
and so here's these guys moving machines around. I just blew my mind, right? So sorry, I digress. Tell me about
no. I mean, it's. I mean, I think it's important stuff because I mean the one I remember of theirs was a Machine That Changed the World.
Which was the book before Lean Thinking by the third author, and I've forgotten
and I think one of the big things in that is if you actually have if you've actually got the cojones to go, we're going to do this differently, it's different. You can actually change things, and you do get different results. It's just get out your rut.
We'll come back to that sentence you just used. If you have the cojones, we'll come back to that, I'm sure. Of course, I got hooked, and Lean, for me, I was a zealot about it, and so started reading all the books, and then got on to Jeff Leica. Is it Jeff Leica who brought Lean from Toyota into the NUMMI plant in California? And the NUMMI plant is now Tesla. And I actually did a tour of that plant. I've done a tour of Toyota here and then tour of that plant. And what the guy was saying to us on the tour was just not lean, just going, guys, you're not getting it here. But anyway, when I did the Toyota plant, my brother-in-law at the time worked for Toyota, so he got us in. I took my managers along, and they just couldn't see this. They didn't have the same excitement that I had. But anyway, we'll go from there. Tell me about the 25 years. I can't imagine it. Like, people, I'm going to talk to you about people. I think people don't get it now. So you've been on this journey for 25 years. Tell me, how did it start and what's happened along the way?
Well, it started, I mean, I told you the sort of, the birth story, if you like. And it was brutally grim at the start, because my comment to the guy in the bar was, nobody can sell that. that proved to be true. He couldn't sell it, and I've never been any good at selling. I don't like it, and I'm not very good at it. And to be honest, we don't sell as a business at all. I mean, people contact us and say, can you fix this? And yeah, go and do it. So it was really, really, really tough going at the start, and partly because this was such an alien way of thinking. I mean, I back then I couldn't walk into a boardroom and talk about viable system model without people looking at me like I got the wrong number of heads, Now, that has not been the case for, I don't know, probably certainly 15, maybe 20 years now, So the situation changed. Gradually, the way of thinking has become more normalized. And partly, I think that's a process of being able to communicate it better. Partly that's the world has woken up to the sorts of issues that systems as an approach was developed to deal with. So now if you talk to people about, the world being complex and uncertain, that's just a truism now. It wasn't then. The world seemed incredibly stable, and the sorts of stuff we were talking about with viable system model, VSM, or any of the systems approaches of, a toolkit to deal with complexity and uncertainty. Well, why would you want that? The world's simple. All we have to do is what we're doing and do it more efficiently, and everything will be fine, and the world's just going to be stable while we do that. That was how pretty much everybody thought, So the world's changed. I mean, people have woken up to the fact that it ain't that simple, and it ain't that steady, And if you think about where we are now, we had the 2008 financial crisis. We've had COVID. We've had in this part of the world, we've had the Ukraine war, and things are geopolitically uncertain in your side of the world and all. So none of that looks safe and steady, anymore. And that's in a sense laid the ground for people to be able to think in a different way. So I'm a firm believer that the vast majority of people don't kind of learn ideas, or they don't learn from ideas. They learn from necessity. Like, this isn't working, that what we thought was true isn't true. And therefore that opens the door for something new to come in. And I think that's the way it works. Getting something new to them is I think largely, there's a Buckminster Fuller quote, the guy who did the geodesic tomes.
Yep.
If you want to change how somebody thinks, forget it. You can't, but give them a tool, the use of which will cause them to think differently, and they will. And I think a lot of that, a lot of what's changed for the systems movement is that, giving people decent tools, and it allows them to think differently.
What level in organizations do you deal with? What level gets it? Does the board, does the senior execs, is it below the execs? Where is it?
It can be at any level, honestly, Rob. When we work at any level, I don't sort of see this as particularly, glamorous or anything. It's like, it's like being an electrician or plumber. You're fixing the pipe work. So we work at whatever level we're asked to, but I mean, it can be any level that gets it, or all, or none. The getting it thing, I think, is really around, for me, it's around, or for us, it's around good process. So basically, I think we lost pretty much a generation's worth of ramming theory down people's throat, and most people don't learn from theory. Academics do, which is why they think that's how you should do it. But everybody who learns through theory is an academic, pretty much. So you know, normal people don't learn that way. You've got to give them decent practice, and if you give them a decent process, you know, do this, then we're going to do that, and then we're going to do that. They'll think in a different way, and they'll come up with some astonishing stuff.
Give us
relatively easily, you know.
Give us some examples of that. Like you say, give them a different process. Well, what do you give them? How do you get them? How do you get them to think in? Because I've been hitting my head against a brick wall inside large organizations, and I haven't got there yet. So help me out here.
Okay, so I'll do the patterns of strategy thing. So for a long time we were asked to do strategy work. So you know, built the business doing stuff around organization using Barber system model, and change using mosaic transformation. And inevitably, if you're doing organizational problems or organizational redesign, you get sort of sucked into that whole strategy debate occasionally, and could never do strategy work, because if you look at the stats, you know, the vast majority of conventional strategy fails. I mean, like 90% fails. So because we don't sell, right, you rely on word of mouth, which means what we do has to work. Okay, so couldn't do strategy work because there wasn't a method that worked. Okay, so developed an approach with my colleague Lucy called Patterns of Strategy. You got the book, which is a totally different way of approaching strategy. You know, it's completely different to any of the conventional strategy approaches, and it works. Okay, how do we get that to work? How do we get people to think in a totally different way about strategy to the way they've ever thought before? You know, and we thought this was going to be a big struggle, you know. So obviously we were concerned that nobody would get it, and Lucy was significantly better at me than I am at kind of process design and tooling and stuff. And so we built the kit. You know, we worked out a process, we built the kit, we try it with people, and it's easy. It's really, really easy, you know. And because there's a good process, because there's good tooling, people just go into it more or less effortlessly, you know. So there's no sort of conceptual wrench. They just walk through a path and start thinking in a completely different way about it.
You got to give me an example. This is too good to be true. This is too good to be true.
Well, I'll give you somebody else example. So I've got a mate who works in the Caribbean, Axel, and he read Patterns of Strategy really, really early, and I think I gave him a copy to proofread actually, or to do a reference or whatever. And he said, well, this is great. You know, I want to use it with a client at an international bank. What do I do? You know, so we sent him over a kit and we talked him through the process. So we had a 2-hour conversation with him, walking him through the process. He went and did it with the client. He came back. He said that was the easiest workshop he'd ever run in his life. You know, just because it's done by the process. You know, you just got to say, well, this is what we're going to do. You do this, then you do that, then you do that, then you do that. You have to think about this. You know, you come to some conclusions about that, then you decide on this, and and they get an answer. You know, or more than one answer, and that's normal in that. You know, so we go on.
Sorry, you were out in Australia before COVID, I think in Adelaide or somewhere running.
No, I didn't come.
You didn't come in the end?
No, we did a load of Patterns of Strategy training remotely.
Ah, all right.
Ah.
So next time you do that, sign me up, please. I'm in.
Okay.
I'm in.
Yeah, will do.
What I found, I've done this with my teams. So I run exercises like I run a prisoner's dilemma game.
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's
The red-blue game.
pardon?
The red-blue game.
No, this one is you're pricing a product at $10 or 20.
Right.
And if you both do 20, you both make this much. If you both do 10, you make this much. But if you do 20 and they do 10, they make a lot more, right? That sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So I do that and I put different teams running, and it's good if you run multiple groups at the same time. And I walk around, just take notes of what they're saying. I told you couldn't trust them, da, 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 da. And often I'd get, who's the other team? What are they, And it would be, are they like the competition, or they, and so that would be all part of the conversation. And I've been doing this guest lecture, and I run it, especially during COVID when we did it all remote. I worked out how to run it remotely with them all and stuff like that. So that gets them internalizing it, right? And I talk about, well, you're actually the same company, you're just different departments. How do you feel now? Or that, yes, they are the customer. They didn't trust you because you wanted to get the highest price. You didn't trust them. How do we work together, et cetera, et cetera. And then I've run many times a lean thinking paper plane exercise, where you do it in batch mode, then you make the batches smaller, da, 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 da. And in a book that I co-authored, Oxfam was one of the case studies, and we ran this with the senior execs and their next layers and stuff like that. And when we get down to the last table where it's single piece flow, one of the people, they kicked all the managers off, and one of the people shouted out, "Who needs managers?" It was great. So for me, it's trying to change. I'm going back to the quote you had before, Buckminster Fuller, but it's how to think differently, to think, hang on. And one of the case studies we did was with Plan International, and the CEO of that, Suzanne Legena, she was blown away by that exercise. All right, and up on my website's an interview with her, which I highly recommend. But she was blown away with how they could do so much more with so much less, right? Anyway.
Yeah.
So that stuff's worked for me. I mean, I'm not a consultant. I've always been working within companies doing this, and getting teams to operate, together across functions and stuff like that. So that work. But when I presented to execs and all that sort of stuff, they all sit there and they go, hang on. It was a bit like reading the grammar of systems, P1 thinking, P2 thinking, P3, P4, right? Like, so P1, they don't think, it's shiny, interesting objects. P2, it's reaching for the silver bullet. And I love your quote. Silver bullets are designed for werewolves, right? There's no reason to suppose they're going to work on vampires. But I don't know how many times people come in with silver bullets, and then when you start introducing reality into them, because you're at the coalface and you're introducing reality, it doesn't always go down well.
Yeah, it's interesting, Rob. I mean, that some of the stuff you've just been talking about is running simulations, and we do that as well. So I've designed a few, and the point for me is to get them is that it's safe. It's safe. It's relatively safe to experiment with a new way of doing and a new way of thinking, because you've got something that's close enough to our reality, but it's not our reality.
Yeah.
And that can be incredibly powerful. With the patterns of strategy stuff, it is reality, because what you're doing, well, you're modeling a real situation, and one of the things that's different is that it's visceral. It's absolutely visceral, So typically when we get asked in, or we've got an open workshop and people are modeling, they want to model their situation. It's because there's a problem, And you just watch the body language, it's like right. So you set out the start positions, of the two parties in the relationship that you're modeling. And you can see the point at which they go, oh my God, that's why I'm awake at 2 o'clock in the morning, because actually this really is sliding into a pile of poo. We are in deep doo-doo here. How do we get out of it? And it absolutely gets people in the guts. And it sneaks up on them, because you're just playing with a deck of cards. You're just doing which of these two parties, which is stronger, which is faster, which is more innovative, which is blah 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 blah. And you rack it up, and they go, "Oops, they're stronger than we are. They're faster than we are. They're they're on the leading edge. We're in trouble." And once you've made that emotional link jump, they can't really go back from that.
I've never played the beer game with John Sternham beer game. I watched a video of it, right, in a documentary, and just that blows them away. I've actually got friends in the UK, Ventana Systems. They use a product called VenSim and build models out.
Yep.
And I love Jay Forrester's quote about, we go into companies, we immediately find where the problem is, and they're pulling on the lever as hard as they can in the absolutely wrong direction.
Way, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. But I think Rob, that in terms of adoption, which is I think what you're kind of teasing around, it's got to be an emotional process, and I think we ignore that at our peril.
Yes,
because it's a very systemsy thing. You've got a boundary. You've got this is how the world is. And it's bounded, and there is a logic to that, and there is an emotional setup that goes with that. So going back to your pre-lean people, that this is how the world is. I work at my lathe for 30 years, and
yes.
and nobody better walk through that boundary and touch it. And it's stable. It's a safe, logical, controlled, stable thing. Now, to move from that to another position, like we're going to do this in a completely different way. You're going from one logical, stable situation to another one. But to get from the first one, it's illogical to move from a position of logic. To move from a stable, logical, controlled position to another one involves being unstable and illogical.
Yeah.
And that's what emotion does.
Yeah.
And if there's no emotion involved, you can't get across. So we have to have processes that involve emotion. Otherwise, nobody moves.
Yeah, they try to build the bridge. They try to.
Yeah.
What are the steps we're going to take to get there? And
you try and do it logically.
You can't, right?
You got to jump. You got to jump. It may be a little jump. It may be to the next stepping stone that leads to the next stepping stone that leads to the next stepping stone. But it's not a bridge.
Yeah. All right. I want to talk. One of the barriers I find to this, and I want to talk to you about organizational structure. And this is my hobby horse. So just,
Yep.
I'm in
and mine.
And yours, right?
And mine.
Good. One of the things I found in doing the book and the case studies, the biggest roadblock to change was if the CEO got it and wanted to change, the biggest roadblock was the next level down. Because we were busting up their fiefdom. We were busting up their logical world, right? Now, when we were trying to go from these vertical functional silos where you did this one function, this one lathe, to value stream mapping and flow and cross-functional teams, what do you mean I don't have control of those people anymore kind of stuff? Do you come across that?
Yeah. So I started my consulting career really in that world. So the introduction of lean in the UK. So at that time, it was just in automotive. It was just in automotive manufacturing, you know, and I did a research project as part of my MBA actually on looking at half a dozen companies who were going through that transformation. So basically, they were in they were working for a prime, you know, a big automotive manufacturer, and who said, right, we're moving to this way of working, and we want to slim down our supply chain. So 2/3 of you guys are going. 2/3 of the companies that suppliers are going, and the ones that are going to make it are going to be the ones that are able to do this transformation. So it was life or death, you know, from a company point of view, because they were all too heavily invested in the prime, you know. So either you get to keep it, or you know, you're gone, you know. And so I was watching these 6 initiatives, and I was sat in they all had sort of, you know, diagonal slice, multi-functional teams running the transformation. And I was sat in one of these meetings one day, and somebody brought up a topic, which is, right, so we're trying to do this thing, and Team A has done whatever it was, this transformation in this way, you know, they've changed their practice. The trouble is, when it hits Team B, it doesn't work, right? So the process flows across from Team A to Team B to Team C to da. Yeah. The way Team A are working does no longer fits with Team B, and Team B haven't changed. What do we do? And there's like an embarrassed silence. And then one of the directors changed the subject. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I said, you know, took me researcher's hat on. You know, research, you're supposed to keep your mouth shut and you know, your ears open. So I said, can we just go back to that? Because it seemed to me quite important. So what I understood was Team A have done the change. Team B doesn't work with Team B. What are they supposed to do about it? And there's another embarrassing silence. And then another director changed the subject. Right. And what happened was the program stopped. The whole transformation stopped at that point. Right. Because you can't change. Team A went back to doing it the way it was before because it would still work. And then, you know, about a month later, I was in another, you know, one of these other 6 companies, exactly the same, almost word for word, exactly the same conversation about exactly the same problem. A few weeks later, third company, almost word for word, exactly the same conversation about exactly the same problem. Okay. So you look at it from a systems point of view and you go, they're assuming that all these teams can change at the same time. And they can't. I mean, obviously, there's different, they've got different issues, you know. Obviously, they are not all going to change at the same time. And you do not have enough spare capacity to change them all at the same time. Therefore, it ain't going to happen. You know? And in every case, it crashed. Every single case. Okay. And it's not people going, oh, I don't want to do this. There was none of that. It was just, it doesn't work and the stuff doesn't go out the door. And we are going to go, you know, we can't work like that. So we'll go back to what does work. Yeah. And they all picked it up in the same way. So by accident, they all fell onto, right, we will work with the bits that work, and we will massage the boundaries of work flowing across until we can get something happening in Team B, and then we'll do the same thing in, you know, and that's how they did it, and that's how it worked in the end. But none of that was to plan.
No.
Now you can look at that in a conventional point of view and go, oh, they're resistant to change. They're not resistant to change. They want to get the work out. You know?
Yeah.
And the transformation process had been designed in a way that meant the company would crash. So they went, nah. quite sensibly, you know.
But it sounds like Team A, Team B, Team C were self-contained units almost, and then passing on. Is that right or not?
Yeah.
Whereas,
which is what you get with silos, whether they're functional or not. You know?
What I've noticed, you know, in one role I was running marketing for a company out. I was living in the US at the time, and I noticed that these other groups were hiring their own marketing people, or I went and found all these marketing people because before I got there, no one, marketing was seen as the brand police, and they were seen as stopping everything. So, so we flipped that on its head. So
now that's a problem that's endemic in IT, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
So you have an IT department and they're trying to standardize and control, and everybody else just goes out and buys their own IT. So then you discover that most of the IT in the company actually is black IT, and the IT department's running around like headless chickens going, oh my God, they've done this again.
I'm guilty of that. So that's what SaaS is brilliant for, right? Software as a service. I signed up to one system when don't tell the guys at Telstra, when I was at Telstra, and this was a project management tool, and I worked out if it was under $50, I didn't have to have a receipt, so I could just process it. The problem was the $49 one I signed up for was in US dollars, and that put us over the 50. So I had to go and confess to I was smarter than that. I signed my boss up to show him how good it was. So, but it was his executive assistant that called me into the office, and when I said no, Paul's on it, it's okay. All right. What I find is, I like things like what the team topologies guys are doing. I like what Beate and Rickard are doing at Beyond Budgeting, right? And the conversation I had with Beate was, I think these functional silos are going to slow down what you're trying to do. And he said, no, well, Beyond Budgeting can sit on any organizational structure. And I think that's true.
It's true, but it's not the point.
It's true, but you got to have strong support, right? And in your paper, Scaling Agile with VSM, with Viable Systems Model, you talked about putting up a firewall to protect the Agile, insulating Agile, I think you called it, or insulating scaling or something. And Beyond Budgeting, call it the umbrella approach. Let's put an umbrella around it. And I just think, and it also comes to trying to build recursive structures, right? So what sitting out here in the Antipodes, running teams across Asia Pacific, we're always been remote. So we get left alone to a certain extent. And a couple of companies ago, I was left alone, and I actually built teams around, we were selling SaaS software, and I had the sales guys sitting with the technical guys, sitting with the support one. The four of them, and they had a group of customers that they looked after, right? And so they worked together, and if the sales guy was selling something that wouldn't work, the guys would hit him across the way. And what also happened was the tech guys were getting phone calls, and the customers asking a bunch of questions. So what are you trying to do? I'm trying to do this. Oh, we've got a product for that. I'll organize such and such to do a demo, blah, blah, blah. It just worked until we got taken over by a large American firm. And instead of customers ringing up their tech support people, we told them to put a ticket in, but then they could call them. It's now press 4 on the IVR. Someone answers you in India. They create a ticket. Someone will call you back, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So wouldn't the world be a much better place if we just organize this way?
Well, the thing is that it depends what you're trying to do. So, I mean, what you're talking about, I've done in factories, okay? And I remember what you were talking about, lean guys going in and starting moving machinery around. Did two exercises in a factory, factory, of course it's manufacturing, duh. Two exercises in a factory where we changed the org structure, but we didn't change the physical layout. So we didn't move any machinery. We just said, instead of being functionally organized, build teams around customer. Okay, so you're going to have you've got particular types of product, and you're going to have a team that does that particular type of product, right? And the productivity went up by 40% within a week.
Yes.
Just by doing that.
Yes.
Okay, and the queues went down, the flow went up, and yada yada yada. You know, super. Okay, so that can work great, but there are situations where that's disastrous. You know, so there are the structure. I mean, when you're doing org structure, which is what you're doing with viable system modeling, okay, you're basically saying, what do we put together and what do we split apart? Okay, so your point about functional is basically the default for a lot of people is we put, I mean, this goes back to Adam Smith and the pin factory thing. We put together people who are doing the same thing. We put all the people who are doing turning together. We put all the people doing welding together. We put all the, you know, and we have a functional thing. And we have a functional thing historically because you could specialize in just turning or just welding, and your foreman knew welding or turning. Great. Okay. So that's a default way of thinking for a lot of people. But equally, you know, but it's just one way of doing the division. There are other ways. You know, you can divide by customer, you can divide by time, you can divide by, you know, geography, you can divide by, you know, and there isn't a single right way. So doing it by customer, which is what we did in that factory, and you're talking about, you know, product for customer, works in a lot of situations, but not all of them.
But I agree with that, right? So it can be doing it by solution, doing it by product, all those sorts of things, right? Until the efficiency police come in, and I hate the word efficiency, but don't trigger me now. And they say, no, we'll smash this together because then we don't need as many of this skill and all that sort of stuff, right? But it's no one thinks about how do we structure around what we're trying to achieve and what's the best way to do that.
And that's absolutely the thing. That's absolutely the thing. So, you know, I remember doing a restructure in an IT company, and they were structured by product teams. Okay, lovely. And they were super, super responsive and super, super quick. So, you know, if customers went, I want, you know, an extra bell on this, or I want it painted blue, they could do it, you know, real quick. Super, super responsive. You know, they did agile, they did DevOps, they did all that stuff. They were faced with a situation where there was a seismic shift in their sector. Okay. And they had no way to respond to that. You can't do it through product teams. Okay. And they'd flatlined in terms of, they'd actually gone down in terms of productivity, and they'd flatlined in terms of revenue for, I think it was 3 years or something. We took them through a process. So it's their decision. It's our process. They have the content, right? So this is the process for deciding on the best organizational structure. Okay. Took them through the process. They come up with a new design, which was based around product life cycle. Okay. So you had a division that did all the existing products. You had a division that was going to develop the next big thing to get us out of this seismic shift problem. And you had a little division that was doing basically building lifeboats, you know, in case the whole ship went down. And that was moving away from product teams. Okay. And the productivity went up by 40%. Again, I mean, it's coincidence it's 40%. In the division that was doing the existing products, they had fewer people, and they were the ones generating all the income because everybody else was on R&D. And they sold 20% more with 20% less people, roughly, you know. They had like 70% of the working teams, you know. And the overall revenues went up by 20%. That's a move away from product teams.
So,
you know,
so it's you know what I said before. It's the outcomes and then how to structure around that. So
yes,
you know, you've got the story of Nokia that went from paper mills to telecommunications, and I worked in the telco industry, and they had 70% market share of mobile phones, which were a product designed by the telcos. We wanted to support, we wanted to chew up data and minutes and stuff like that. And then some other guy, I think his name was Jobs, came along and said, how about I focus on the customer? And away you go. And the other example I put in chapter 3 on my blogcast and my bookcast is Charles Schwab. You know, the seismic shift in the trading industry was going online. So they set up a different group called eSchwab, and eSchwab competed with the traditional model until eSchwab basically consumed it, and then away they get. And of course, compare that to Blockbuster and Netflix, right? So it goes on and on and on. HP set up a separate group to do inkjet printers. IBM set up PC computers. So, but again, they're focused on outcomes and and aligning it that way.
Yes, and sometimes functional's the right way to go. Sometimes. Yeah.
I liked it. I don't have it in front of me, but I liked a line you used in that paper, the scaling agile with viable systems model, where you said shared service teams forget that they're part of the organization. Yeah, they start to exist for themselves, right? And you see that all the time. And I've worked in shared services like marketing and stuff like that.
We will just before I move on though, Rob, I should add that wasn't purely my paper. I did it with a guy called Mike Burrows, who's big in agile, and Steve Morledge, Steve Morledge used to chair the Beyond Budgeting group.
Yes.
And he came to VSM looking for a theoretical base for Beyond Budgeting.
Right.
So that's how he came to be a VSM guy, you know.
Yep. I reference all three of you in my video, so you know, I'm keen to make sure I get my references right.
But I was just trying to hook back to your previous reference to Beyond Budgeting.
So Beyond Budgeting just makes sense, right? But anyway, before I move off that paper, you sent it to me. Can people access that paper? It's a great one to read. It is more technical.
I think so. I think it's on the Agile Business Consortium website. I'll see if I can find a link.
All right. It's not on your Fractal website. No. I had a look there, but if it's on the other one, if you can send me.
No, that's because our website's like way out of date, you know.
All right. Look, it's always, you know, again, I use Beate Bogsner's analogy of traffic lights and roundabouts. So wherever I drive now, I look, oh, there's a traffic light. I was stuck at one and hardly any traffic the other way. And look, there's a roundabout. But yes, roundabouts don't work everywhere, and traffic, you know, all that sort of stuff too. So it's horses for course.
They don't work in the US, do they?
They do have some roundabouts. Where we lived up in Connecticut, I'm trying to remember where. I went to take photos so I could put them in my video, and there were two really big roundabouts out of the main part of Melbourne, and I hadn't been there for a while, so I drove out there to take these photos, and they've converted them into traffic lights. And I went, "What are you doing?" You know, this is anyway. Recursive structures, help me out here. How can you have recursive structures with functional silos?
Recursive
structures. Just for the audience, a recursive structure is you have a team which is inside a bigger team, which is inside another recursive structure, inside another recursive structure. All right.
Yeah. So this is a natural ordering thing. Yeah. So if you go back to your guy with the lathe, okay. So at one level of recursion, to use the technical term, you know, he is doing an activity which is, let's say it's you know, he's fixing his tool into the lathe, into the tool head on the lathe. Okay. That is part of a bigger activity, which is turning this you know, component. That is part of a bigger activity, which is making the components, making the battery components or the string components. That is part of a bigger activity, which is all the turnings we're doing. That is part of a bigger activity, which is all the machining, which is part of a bigger activity, which is, putting together all the components for, let's say, a gearbox, which is part of a bigger activity, which is building a car. Yeah, I mean, it's not because it's bigger, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
You see the point. So there is a natural structure of work that is, you have things that are smaller components of bigger things. This is how systems of any sort get built up. The design question is, how do you group those? And that's how you end up with a functional structure, or a geographic one, or a customer one, or a time-based one, or what. And really the question is, how do you deal with those things? How do you deal with those different types of complexity? So if you're running a multinational, do you structure it around geography at the highest level, or do you deal with that lower down? Do you say, right, we've got a division that works, Asia Pacific and Australia, and then another one that's Europe, and another one that's America. Do we structure it like that? And each of those is like sort of a clone of the other. They're all the same, but they work their patch. And then do we do functional within each of those, or do we do customer based in within each of those? And the right answer to that question depends on what you said. It depends on outcomes. Yeah, but you can do it. You can imagine. Let's say a bank. They might decide to do that by geography. They might decide to do it by customer. So we have a division that does retail banking, and then we split by geography. Or we have a division that does business banking, and then we split by geography.
Handelsbank.
You get different results depending on whether you do geography first.
Yep. But Handelsbanken, reading Beate's latest book in the UK, when they went into the UK, they did it by geography with support out to higher centres if they needed it. So my next chapter in my bookcast is actually going to be on go-to-market in Asia Pacific, right? So yes, it's on outcome, but it's also on how the best way to achieve that outcome.
Yeah.
So Asia Pacific is like half the world's population. So I call it very wide, but it's very shallow. Right? You've got the GDP of China, which is not far off America, and then Japan, and then it drops away dramatically to all the other countries. And you got 25 different countries. You better be able to cover at least 5 languages: Japanese, Korean, Mandarin, Thai. Is the rest you can probably get away with. But so it's a combination of that.
Yeah.
But when I worked for IBM, I ran a team across Asia Pacific. It was actually a solutions team. That's how we're organized. Implementing ERP solutions, SAP, JD Edwards, those sorts of things, right? When I resigned from IBM, I had to send my email to my 3 bosses. One in Australia, one in New York, and one in Tokyo.
Yeah.
And I never heard from the one in Australia. I heard from the other 2. But I see so many companies have functional all the way, from one below the CEO all the way through. And I get that somewhere, like even when I ran a couple of jobs ago, those cross-functional teams, I still had some specialist teams. So if we're doing an on-site install, there was a whole set of specialist skills. And this is what team topologies would talk about with their, what they call it, their subsystem team, right, that does that, so I like that a lot. All right, I get what you're saying. I think we're on the same.
I mean, just on that, Rob, if you've got an organization,
complicated subsystem team. Sorry, I just thought of that.
If you've got an organization that's like that and it's only seeing the functional split, I can't think of a situation where you're not missing something. So there is a complexity factor out in the environment that the environment you're engaged with that you are not dealing with in the organization, right? So part of this is thinking about the organization structure as a way of absorbing complexity coming in from the environment. So you've got to understand what that complexity looks like coming from the environment, and then work out the best way to handle that as it flows through the organization. Because where you don't handle it, then you get chaos flowing through the organization.
So when you quote Ross Ashby's two people, do they get it? Like, because
I never do.
you never do.
I don't do that. Don't do that.
All right. All right. And then Stafford Beer says that the best way, there is a way to handle complexity. It's to ignore it. It's a dangerous way, but there is a way to handle it.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And that's, real common.
Real common. See that. All right. I think I'm out of questions. And we're out of time, and I might circle back, Patrick. But thank you very much.
No, it's a pleasure, mate.
I'm going to, in my next chapter, I'm going to cut out what you just said and put that in there. So people watching this, when it repeats, you'll see where it came from. But, and again, in the interview with Suzanne Legena, she talked about how they survived through the pandemic, because they run programs for children in all these different countries. And they were pushing the work back down in the decision-making to the teams in the countries. And what she said was it never came back because they really liked it and they got on with it, and they refused to hand it back. And she says that's a good thing, right? So I agree with you. All right. You're signing me up for the course if you're going to do it remote again, or if you come back out to Australia, or if you come out to Australia, that would be great. And I thank you very much for your time. I'll put up your contact details, like your website and stuff like that. If you can send me the link to that paper, that would be great. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Likewise, mate. And nice to meet after all these years.
Yes, indeed. And I will get you to sign your book when you come out here. So there you go. Thank you very much. Cheers.
All right. See you, Rob.